You are about to hear a story the world was never meant to remember. Imagine a place where the mountains themselves whisper secrets, where each shadow could be hiding a life stolen by the earth. Between 1847 and 1874, in the remote Appalachians, 97 people vanished from a settlement so isolated it seems to have been carved out of myth. Not all at once, but in a rhythm that defied logic, a pattern as deliberate as it was terrifying. Every disappearance coincided with the new moon, every 3 months, like clockwork. Each vanished soul left behind one leather shoe, always the left, stuffed with damp clay and pine needles, placed in the center of their bed as if the mountain demanded tribute. The clay, still warm to the touch, seemed drawn from the deep heart of the earth itself. Federal investigators eventually arrived, yet were met with perfection and silence. Ledgers showing impossible wealth, children dressed in Boston finery, a community thriving while 97 of its own had simply ceased to exist. And when asked where the missing had gone, every resident spoke in unison: "The mountain keeps its own accounts." Hollow Ridge was no accident. Hidden deep in a valley that sunlight touched for only 4 hours a day, it was a fortress of stone and mist, a place designed to be forgotten by the world. Its founder, Josiah Henley, was a man who had spent 20 years underground and emerged with an uncanny ability to sense metal as others sense the wind. He had lost his wife to cholera, leaving 3 sons in need of a future, and he saw in this valley a promise few could understand. Henley did not gather outcasts or criminals. He selected craftsmen, miners and engineers, men and women who had once built railroads, blasted tunnels, and engineered airflow in the deepest mines of Europe. Each family brought a unique skill: explosives, metallurgy, ventilation, and even faith, embodied by Reverend Paul Sutterfield, whose sermons would slowly bend from providence to sacrifice. Henley spoke of independence, of wealth beyond imagination, but whispered also of secrets buried beneath the valley's red waters, copper veins deeper than any mine should hold, and an opportunity to escape the banks, the companies, and the world that had crushed them. Those who followed him were seduced not just by survival, but by the sense that they were stepping into something older, more powerful, and far more dangerous than any man could own. The first disappearance came not with warning, but with inevitability. On the night of March 15, 1847, Margaret Dietrich, 19, simply ceased to exist. Her bed lay empty, sheets untouched, window open to the freezing night, and at its center, a single leather shoe, the left one, filled with clay and pine needles, warm as if the earth itself had delivered it. Her initials were carved into the leather, yet the sole told a story of miles she had never walked. The clay inside hardened into the perfect mold of her foot, down to the smallest detail. Panic gripped Hollow Ridge, though the settlers were bound by the unspoken rules Henley had instilled: search, but accept the impossible. They scoured forests, dragged creeks, and checked every mine shaft. Dogs refused to track her scent, whining as though warning their masters away. Near an ancient Cherokee marker, they discovered 17 ravens, dead, arranged in a perfect circle. Their necks twisted identically, wings spread, bodies still warm in the freezing air. At the center, a handprint pressed deeper into the frozen soil than a human hand should have been able to reach. The mountain had taken, and the message was clear: no one was beyond its claim. 3 months later, the mountain claimed again. William McCready, a man forged by labor and iron, vanished from the mine's entrance where he had been keeping watch. His rifle remained propped against the wall, his pipe still smoking, and a single left shoe filled with the same warm clay and pine needles lay where he had been. Inside the mine, footprints began 30 feet in, as though he had materialized from the darkness itself, stopping abruptly at a wall of solid rock. Panic now gripped Hollow Ridge like a living thing. Families barricaded doors, tied children to their wrists, and ventured out only in groups, their lanterns piercing the fog like weak suns. Storms arrived without warning, wagons broke, illnesses struck. Yet somehow, the valley seemed to conspire, keeping them trapped. Those who attempted to leave found the paths impassable, as if the earth itself rejected their escape. And in the heart of it all, Henley called the settlers to the church. Standing before the entire community, he spoke in a voice that would be etched into memory. The mountain gives copper, copper gives wealth, and wealth demands payment. The disappearances were no accident. They were the covenant, absolute and eternal. Henley revealed a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and yellowed, written in a script older than any known language. Yet somehow, each person in the church could understand it, the knowledge flowing directly into their minds. It told of civilizations that had mined the valley long before humans remembered, of societies that had vanished after feeding the mountain in the same ritualized pattern. The ledger inside listed 2,247 names, people who had become part of the copper itself, their flesh transformed into metal, their blood seeping into the red rivers that ran each spring. The Cherokee had known of this breathing place, avoiding it, performing ceremonies to heal it, leaving offerings to keep its hunger at bay. Henley's words carried a chilling weight. They were servants, the mountain their provider, bound to a covenant older than time. To survive, they had to participate, to witness, to understand that the disappearances were not evil, they were inevitable. And yet, knowing did not ease the fear. The children, the men, the women, they would all be tested. One day, perhaps, one of them would be chosen to join the mountain, and the valley, silent and shrouded in mist, would wait, patient as death, for the next payment. As months passed, Hollow Ridge became a community governed less by law and more by fear. The quiet, absolute authority of the mountain. Reverend Sutterfield's sermons, once filled with providence and hope, twisted into lessons of sacrifice and obedience. He spoke of the covenant, of payment owed, and of the sacred duty to the valley. Children were taught to fear the forest beyond the valley walls. Men and women were taught to fear their own desires. Every action was measured against the unseen gaze of the mountain. The disappearances, once shocking, became inevitable, discussed in hushed tones like the passing of seasons. Families began to recognize the subtle signs, the angle of tree branches, the direction of the wind, the red-stained waters of Burden Creek, as omens. Disobedience was rare but punished by terror. Livestock disappearing, sudden illness or storms that isolated homes for days. The valley itself seemed alive, conspiring, enforcing the covenant. And in the center of it all, Henley stood, mentor and manipulator, a man who had seen the mountain's hunger and willingly bound his people to it. The settlers began to understand that survival required surrender, not just of wealth, but of will, of hope, and eventually of life itself. The third disappearance marked a new, darker turn. 8-year-old Timothy Cranston vanished while playing in the sunlit valley, gone in a heartbeat, leaving only his left shoe in the locked church, clay hardened into a perfect mold of his foot. This time, the clay contained fragments of crystallized blood, metallic, unnatural, impossible. The people of Hollow Ridge no longer reacted with disbelief. Instead, a grim acceptance settled over them. Families patrolled the forests, guided by Henley's instructions, and discovered patterns that defied comprehension. Axe marks ascending tree trunks in impossible sequences, ravens arranged in perfect circles, handprints pressed impossibly deep into the frozen soil. Every disappearance, every ritual, seemed to reinforce an understanding they could not articulate. The mountain demanded obedience, not fear. Slowly, the community's psychology shifted. Children learned that stepping outside the bounds of the covenant meant vanishing. Adults began to see their neighbors not just as companions, but as custodians of the mountain's secret. Hope became a liability, compliance became survival, and yet, buried beneath this obedience, curiosity lingered. Some dared to wonder what lay at the heart of the mountain, beyond the sealed mine, beyond the patterns, beyond the very reality they had accepted. The answer, they suspected, would not be human. The old mine, known as the Old Working, was not merely a hole in the ground. It was a labyrinth older than memory, a place where human logic faltered. Tunnels folded back on themselves, chambers expanded beyond comprehension, and stairways led nowhere, yet always brought travelers closer to the heart of the mountain. The walls shimmered with copper that seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly, as if aware of those who trespassed. Miners whispered that sometimes the ring of pickaxes could be heard from tunnels that had no entrance, as though workers from centuries past still labored, their bodies fused with the ore. Henley led select groups into these depths, teaching them the ritual of selection, how to place the shoes, how to measure the moon, how to interpret the mountain signs. Each initiation bound the participant tighter to the covenant, threading fear, respect, and awe into a single, unbreakable cord. Outside, families watched the fog thickening, saw shadows that could not be natural, and understood, without words, that the mountain was watching, always calculating, always demanding. And in the heart of this impossible labyrinth, they began to see patterns not of stone or earth, but of intelligence, a mind older than humanity itself, guiding, choosing, feeding. Henley's ledger became the community's silent god, a record of those claimed by the mountain and those spared. Each name marked the passage from life into legend, a currency of fear and survival. Shoes, clay, pine needles, and blood fragments were meticulously catalogued, each detail precise, each pattern deliberate. The settlers learned to read these symbols as scripture: the height of axe marks, the alignment of stones, the timing of disappearances. All were part of a system older than any living memory. Families whispered about the choices, about the randomness that was never truly random. Some believed the mountain saw into the very soul, selecting those whose presence sustained its hunger. Others believed it was the covenant itself, the act of submission that dictated fate. The disappearances became lessons, ritualized and predictable, yet incomprehensible. The mountain demanded nothing less than total obedience, and each act of compliance was both survival and sacrifice. It was a system of control that penetrated every thought, every fear, every desire, binding the settlers into a collective consciousness that no outsider could understand. And as the ledger grew, so too did the weight of knowledge. Once you saw the mountain's design, there was no turning back. Now, listen closely, because this is where understanding becomes participation. Hollow Ridge was not just a settlement, it was a crucible, transforming those who lived within it. Every act, every disappearance, every ritual of shoes and clay forged obedience into identity. And you, sitting here, are beginning to witness the same patterns, the same architecture of control, from a safe distance. But make no mistake, knowledge changes the mind. If you understand even a fraction of what I am showing you, you will see the hidden forces shaping the world outside your window. This is the moment to anchor yourself. In the comments, write the phrase, "I walk the mountain," twice. Let it mark your awareness, your recognition of the hidden systems that govern life, wealth, and death. It is more than symbolism, it is alignment. Like the settlers, you are acknowledging a pattern, a covenant, a truth that most will never see. Once written, once spoken, you cannot forget. You have begun to step into the shadows where the powerful and the informed dwell, where history's deepest secrets wait to be unearthed. And from here, the Valley of Hollow Ridge will open its gates for you, revealing things men were never meant to know. The Cherokee called it the breathing place, a name that carried both fear and reverence. They spoke of beings not quite human, not quite spirit, who had delved into the earth long before memory, leaving structures that defied reason. Chambers that grew larger as you entered, tunnels that twisted impossibly, and walls that seemed alive with metal veins, resonating with a hum that penetrated bone. Henley's journal described them in detail. Their flesh had merged with the ore, their blood had become the rivers that flowed red each spring, their work still echoing through time. Miners occasionally reported hearing the ring of picks in tunnels that had no entrance, voice, as whispering in languages that predated humanity. The mountain, it seemed, remembered every life it touched, folding it into itself, preserving it in copper, clay, and shadow. And as Hollow Ridge expanded its own covenant, the settlers were not just observing history, they were stepping into it, participating in a cycle older than any king or empire. Every shoe, every disappearance, every crystallized fragment of blood was a reminder. Power is a system, obedience its currency, and the mountain is patient. It does not forget. It does not forgive. The valley itself seemed alive, an entity with will and intent. Paths twisted unnaturally, streams flowed against logic, and fog rolled in as if to obscure what should have been seen. Families tried to leave, only to find the terrain reshaping itself, ravines closing, trees shifting, clouds thickening into walls. Even the sun seemed to obey the mountain, granting light sparingly, measuring their hours, reminding them of how small and transient they were. Men who resisted the rules reported dizzying confusion, compasses spinning, and echoes that mimicked their own voices in mocking repetition. Women and children grew attuned to signs, a snapping twig, a shift in wind, the pattern of the red creek, each a warning, a command, a message from something older than life. The covenant was no longer just ritual, it had become instinct. Every heartbeat was measured, every glance calculated, and at the center of it all, Henley moved like a conductor, orchestrating fear, reverence, and obedience into a harmony no outsider could hear without trembling. Hollow Ridge was a living system of control, and its lesson was brutal and clear. The mountain dominates, always, and those who survive are the ones who surrender first. Beneath Hollow Ridge, the old mine stretched into impossible geometry, a labyrinth that rejected human comprehension. Walls glimmered with veins of copper that seemed to pulse like veins of living flesh, and shadows moved where no one walked. Miners spoke of corridors folding back on themselves, chambers larger inside than the mountain itself, and stairways that led nowhere yet always brought them closer to the heart of the covenant. Occasionally, faint metallic whispers echoed, language older than memory, commands or warnings they could feel more than hear. The disappeared were said to have entered willingly or unwillingly, but none returned unchanged. Some claimed to see glimpses of beings fused with metal, spectral figures bent to the will of the mountain, hammering at unseen walls, carrying the covenant forward through eternity. Henley's journal described initiation rituals for the living, teaching the chosen how to survive, how to serve, how to witness without resisting. Each act of obedience reinforced the system, fear, ritual, and knowledge entwined into an unbreakable chain. The settlers understood, deep in their bones, that the mountain did not negotiate. It did not forget. It remembered everything, choosing precisely who would vanish next, and who would remain to witness, forever changed. Every disappearance followed a pattern older than Hollow Ridge itself, a schedule dictated by the mountain's hunger. Shoes left with clay and pine needles, blood fragments crystallized in perfect molds, axe marks rising impossibly up trees, all were part of a ledger no human hand could have conceived. Henley's records became scripture, mapping the cycles of sacrifice with terrifying precision. Those chosen to vanish were not random. The mountain measured, calculated, and selected, demanding payment in flesh and fear. Families watched, knowing the next moment could claim them. Yet they obeyed, understanding the system of power that governed them. Compliance became instinct, survival entwined with participation in the impossible. Outside observers, should they ever stumble upon Hollow Ridge, would perceive only a prosperous settlement, a picture of order and wealth. But the truth was buried in layers of fear, ritual, and submission, a civilization feeding a system older than memory, a hunger that shaped reality itself, and the mountain waited, patient as death, recording every act, every thought, every heartbeat, ensuring the covenant endured. To resist was meaningless, to ignore was fatal. The settlers had learned the only truth that mattered. Survival was a measure of obedience. Henley's control extended beyond instruction. It was psychological mastery, a shaping of minds to bend willingly to the mountain's will. Fear alone was insufficient. Reverence, awe, and ritual became tools of obedience. Children were raised knowing the covenant, adults reminded daily of their debt, and the entire settlement moved as a single organism, bound by the ledger and the mountain's invisible gaze. Curiosity was both a sin and a compass. Those who sought answers too deeply risked disappearance or madness, yet they could not stop looking. Even love, hope, and ambition were subsumed, converted into instruments of service. Witnessing the disappearances, reading the journal, participating in the rituals, they were irrevocably changed. Every man, woman, and child carried a mark on the soul, a memory of the impossible, a lesson that power demands sacrifice. The valley, the fog, the red waters, and the ancient mine became extensions of their consciousness, a reminder that control is total and freedom is an illusion. And as the ledger grew, so too did the weight of inevitability. Those who remained were prisoners, servants, and observers, forever tethered to a cove, that transcended time and humanity itself. The mountain waits still, patient, timeless, its hunger eternal. Hollow Ridge is gone from maps, scrubbed from records, yet its covenant continues, etched into the stones, the trees, and the air itself. Every disappearance, every ritual, every crystallized shoe is proof of a system older than kings, older than empires, older than memory. Those who bore witness were changed forever, men shaped by knowledge no one else can grasp, bound to a truth the world refuses to see. And now, as you sit here listening, reading, understanding, you too have stepped into the shadow of that covenant. The ledger is invisible, yet its rules still apply. Observation without respect, curiosity without submission, carries weight. To anchor your awareness, comment now, "I walk the mountain twice." Let it seal your recognition, your alignment with forces hidden in plain sight. You are no longer a passive observer. You are part of the continuum, marked by the knowledge of power, obedience, and ancient hunger. Remember, the mountain never forgets. It watches. It waits. And the covenant endures, patient as eternity, measuring who will vanish, who will serve, and who will witness, forever changed.